Well, it's always nice to check out a piece of World War II history, so let's do that with this Japanese katana. It's a pretty workmanlike example. These were cranked out in fairly large numbers. Obviously, it was a modern war, and Japan understood that. They had a modernized, effective army. But the empire unsurprisingly seized upon the, glorious samurai past, right, to try to stir up that martial spirit. So you had a lot of swords made. You also had a lot of existing ones carried and used as kind of honor, prestige objects. But really, both those and the ones created during the war or during the run-up were meant to be used. I mean, they really did think at some point, they might be using these to defend the homeland. Especially as time went on and the tide turned in the war. And yeah, they were carried abroad as well. The katana is obviously the ultimate symbol of national warlike pride. And despite how anachronistic it was, these were made to specific standards and quality control checks that the new swords were put through. But this was, of course, pretty impractical. If you're equipped like these guys here, do you want to have to worry about, wearing and carrying a 3-foot sword as well? Of course not, but you did have officers, for instance, who would wear one, maybe brandish it and lead their forces into combat, into an actual fight with it. As kind of a rallying symbol. So let's get back to ours, though. It's a nice piece of work. Again, this is not meant to impress with the visual polish. And you can see the pin and washer here, not even, perfectly placed. Meanwhile, you've got a very simple wooden handle with just a basic crisscross pattern carved into it. Obviously, they were willing to make sacrifices on the traditional standards. Still, it is a handsome weapon. I think the color scheme and overall visuals actually look great. And not upon close inspection, certainly not, but watch as I keep panning out. I would say even on just pure aesthetics, it works. But going back to what I was saying earlier, it was made to be used or to such specifications that it certainly should hold up to actual use. The most notable feature is this, I guess we'll call it a safety. You don't see those very often on swords from any country, do you? I do not know how common this feature was in the World War II production models. In this view here, you can see the hole in the tsuba that allows the safety to go all the way through. Then it's got kind of a notched head, as you're going to see, and that, of course, retains the sword. I mean, unless you push down on this safety, that sword is not coming out. And here's what that looked like in operation. It's just a very simple spring mechanism, as you can tell. And that will do the job. It's an interesting touch. Here's another view of that noteworthy feature. It's funny, in the old world, pre-modern warfare, you still didn't want to lose your sword. I don't think this is necessary just because it was meant to be used in a modern war. It was running and jumping and climbing and whatever it is you're doing is the same, regardless of whether there's bullets flying through the air or arrows. I could definitely be missing something there, though. And here in this final view, you see the kind of sleeve, the bracket that the safety goes through, which is, of course, attached to the scabbard. And traditional Japanese swordsmanship involves all kinds of quick draws. It was really interesting. It was kind of like the Wild West before the Wild West, and it was quick drawing with your katana instead of with a 6-shooter. This would not work for that. Here we can see the point. Very traditional shape, but obviously, look at the polish, the finish on that steel. Just not even close to what you see in older models. Here's a group of World War II specimens, so you can see some of the variation in design. The one that is second to the bottom looks a lot like the one we're examining today. It's the one at the bottom right now as the final one emerges. Swords made untraditionally during this time and for this need are called shoto. That's as good as I can do, and this is definitely an example. I mentioned officers wielding swords, or at least carrying them, but I didn't mention that all officers were required to have them. So that was definitely part of the production need, and as you can imagine, they had more important uses for quality steel, so sacrifices had to be made. Sacrifices and shortcuts. You were not going to exquisitely work by hand on every one of these. But like I said earlier, they were made to be functional. And to Allied and American troops, really, it didn't matter. A katana was a katana, and this was, I would say, the most highly prized war trophy there was for American troops in World War II. Here in this picture, officer after officer turned theirs in. And how crazy is this image here? This is a mid-20th century war, the largest in history, of course, and, fully industrialized belligerents, but then you get a snapshot like this. I always think one of the most remarkable aspects of the 20th century is how America and Japan became such close allies. It started, of course, with a sneak attack. It ended with the only atomic bombs dropped in history, and then there was incredibly bitter fighting in between. And in no time, historically speaking, the two nations are as close as can be. So, along those lines, here's a great story where an American family returned the captured katana to its Japanese family. And this was not a Shoto, right? This is like a prestige heirloom version. But back to ours, which was not one of those, it's still a great antique. An interesting piece of World War II history for sure, but also kind of a physical case in point regarding Japan's modernization and its reverence for its past. Well, as always, thank you for watching.